In Product Meetup was in collaboration with Autogen AI. And we took a bit of a slightly different format with AI lightning talks from each of you following the product lifecycle. So we're going to jump straight into hearing a snippet from each of you about that journey and about your talks. So Teodora, you kicked us off on the evening. So thank you for being the brave one and taking that first step.
Yeah, so I spoke about practical AI evaluation. I spoke a little bit about the relationship between quant and qual data, which one is more important, which one you look at. I spoke a bit about why it's important to have your own in-house evals, like have your own company scorecards, because provider metrics and benchmarks are pretty general. It was basically geared around how you can measure things by yourself in your company or in your personal life.
Brilliant. And one thing that I wanted to ask you based on your conversation was who should be using AI evaluations and why are they so important?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it maybe used to just be like data scientists and researchers for whom that was relevant. But actually now I think it's everyone, anyone who's deploying AI systems that like affect real people and that have outputs and some sort of consequence. Everyone should be doing it. And I think product managers will be getting a lot more into AI evaluations as time goes on. I think that'll be a big part of their role. Developers, that's like a big part of our role. Anyone basically building the system should be doing it. No, we shouldn't just be relying on these provider evaluations. And the reason it's important is because you're flying blind without evaluation. You don't know if it's helping users. You don't know if it's relevant to your use case. As I said, the benchmarks provided by the LLM providers, they're just guides. They aren't specific enough to your use case. They're pretty general. And they might talk about things which aren't relevant to you, like logical consistency or coding ability when you're working on like a very language conversational product. So coding ability is nothing to do with you. And you're slowly shifting the conversation from like, does this large language model work to does it work well enough for this context, for these people, for this use case? So yeah, that's why it's really important to have your own evaluations. And like I said, I think everyone should be using them. Anyone who's building or deploying AI systems.
And in your talk, you shared with us your use of scorecards and you gave us some really good examples of those as well, which we'll be kind of like sharing as well so that people can have a look at those. But I suppose the focus from you was like, how do you judge the like output criteria with what you've set to be considered as good? So tell us how you would like practically use scorecards and how you, I suppose the importance that you mentioned was keeping iterating on them as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. So we use scorecards pre-production and post-production, and the way they look is every feature on our tool, every transformation we call it, has a set of scorecards that relate to what good looks like for that specific feature or transformation. So pre-production, let's say we want to change something, we want to change a prompt, we want to change the way that something works. We get whatever number you want, but let's say for case of example, like 100 outputs of that new feature, 100 outputs that new feature would provide. And we test scorecards against that. We test how they work on all the things that are relevant to it. Post-production, we monitor whether the features are acting in the way that we want based off of those scorecards. So again, we take then production data, we take outputs there and test on those scorecards. And then you compare the scorecards, quantitative data of the scorecards to the qualitative feedback that you're getting. And do they match up? The aim is to check whether they match up. And actually the bigger aim is to get to a point where the scorecards are so accurate that they predict the feedback that we'd be getting from users. So we don't have to wait for users and get their feedback because we've matched them up so well that they can really tell us a lot. But yeah, the scorecards basically, they reflect real world outcomes and specific things that make an answer good. What are the elements of a good response? So if you say, make this, like if I'm speaking to someone, I wouldn't just say make this paragraph better or improve this essay. I would specifically say, the grammar isn't very good in this essay. I want the paragraphs to be shorter. I want it to be less wordy. So the scorecards are really measuring like the intricate parts of a good answer, not just is this a good output, because that's quite general. And yeah, often our definitions of good, they shift. Users evolve, models improve. We learn more about failure models, and scorecards aren't just about judgment. It's like dialogue and alignment and continuous learning and constantly iterating on them and making sure they still reflect our North Star, because you'd be surprised by how quickly that changes with how quickly AI is evolving.
Brilliant. So the kind of key takeaways from you is that like everyone should be using AI evaluations, anyone who's working with AI. And really that kind of like iteration of your scorecards and keeping on top of those and being very specific about like what good looks like and changing that over time is your kind of key takeaways.
Yeah.
Fab.
And
Chris,
I
oh,
was sorry,
sorry.
I was just going to add that actually evaluations, they don't have to be a big framework. It can just be a couple of things that you're looking for in your output, and you can just use another large language model to test it. It doesn't have to be some complicated framework that you have to build up from scratch. It's really just about understanding what good looks like for you.
Because it does sound quite daunting, really, doesn't it? If you haven't put that in place, like previously, Melanie and Ollie and I were chatting before this podcast about how like the naivety sometimes of kind of not being technical myself really helps in terms of those questions. And that kind of sounds quite daunting, but really in terms of actually people starting out that process, are there any like tips that you would give people in terms of just being able to take the first step in doing that?
I think step one is like forget building anything, forget, building a framework that does that. Just think about what you're looking for. Just think, what am I doing with this? What is my best outcome? What would be the perfect outcome? What are the necessary conditions for this to be acceptable? And then think about what are the things that would make it extra good and extra nice. And then just start writing that down. Think of it as if you were telling somebody else how to judge the text. You would tell them, look at, does this piece of text have all the correct grammar? Does this piece of text have, like, what's an example of something that we need? Yeah. Does this text have all the relevant sources woven throughout, or does it just dump them all at the end in a really incongruent way? Just really think about what you need, and then just start writing small questions of evaluations, and you can just copy your piece of text, put the evaluation above, and put that even in ChatGPT if you want, and just say, does this output fall under these things? Obviously, if you don't have a framework, you can kind of only do one output at once, so it does take a little bit longer. But if you have a smaller use case, then it shouldn't matter.
Nice. Thanks, Teodora. Christian, you did not follow. You were not second, but we're going to jump to you in the product life cycle. So in your talk, you kind of mentioned around the develop and test side of things, and that's kind of what you were focused on. You shared the importance of understanding the stage of users when it comes to the adoption of AI. You kind of mentioned some tell signs. So tell us a bit more about this and how you evaluate where your users are on their journey to adoption.
Essentially, my talk was a lot more on who are going to be those early adopters and what do you typically see and what are those blockers, right? So Teodora did a great talk on the evaluation side, both pre and post going through a launch, and why it's important, which it very much is. But I think as well, when you're building, it's so important to have people's feedback. And one thing that I deal with at the moment, and I have done throughout pretty much my whole career, is people kind of pushing back against these automations. And a lot of the reason is because of fear. And I can talk about that all I want now because Todd's not in the call. But essentially, the fear off the back of that, there's multiple different fears. One of the biggest and obvious ones is this going to take my job? People understandably feel quite a lot of fear towards this, right? And which the answer usually is no. Usually the answer is we're going to help you do your job better. But obviously that comes down to per case. Another fear is security. Is it going to leak my data all over the internet, and everyone who uses OpenAI is going to see my most sensitive and private chats? The answer to that is maybe, but it really depends on how you use it, and there are safe ways of doing this. Other fears that come into play can be just the learning curve. It's kind of the pushback that people have because it's not like anything they've used. And one thing that you'll find is there's an absolute power law, and there's such a distribution between people where some people are really AI native. They love it. They can't get enough of it. They use it in their own life. They just want to be able to use it at work as well and have it built for something that they're trying to do and solve one of their problems. And other people will barely know what AI really is. And there's even bigger disparity when it comes to using AI or Gen AI solutions, an even bigger one arguably than traditional technology. So yeah, it's really about overcoming those fears and those pushbacks and figuring out how you work with people, not against them, because if you go against them, you're never going to make a meaningful product. So it's building those relationships and solving some of those fears, for instance, with upskilling, so that it makes that learning curve a bit easier. It could be explaining the purpose of the application you're making so that they know it's not replacing them, but rather making them the best they can be at what they're trying to do.
I think as well, it's quite interesting when it comes to fear, isn't it? Because in your talk, you mentioned not just, I suppose, the fear around initial adoption, as in like the actual want to use AI can be there. But then actually when the reality becomes quite true of like what you're going to need in terms of investment, expense, training, all of this kind of stuff, then that's really kind of getting that commitment from people is quite difficult once they understand like the reality of that as well. And when you're mentioning about scaling your business, what does testing AI look like compared to like traditional software? And are there any new practices that people are going to need to adopt now?
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, you're asking basically what's the difference between testing, at least putting it in front of users in those iteration cycles and getting their feedback post launch, if you like, or post product, as opposed to traditional tech. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, when you're building AI, at least in my mind, the framework is the same game plan, right? It's the same game plan as you do with typical technology, where you're not going to build it in a silo for a year and then bring it out and go, look what I've got. And everyone's like, this sucks. This absolutely sucks. You kind of want to know why it sucks early on and build it with the users, right? This is true of traditional tech and AI. That's not an AI specific thing. One of the bigger changes is kind of what I was saying before with those fears. They're a bit more pronounced, especially with AI, because of its ability to start automating specific processes. So it might mean that in that testing phase, to get meaningful feedback, you're doing a bit more head work beforehand or upfront work beforehand. But I think in testing and getting this feedback is because AI is by nature probabilistic. So for instance, if part of your testing is it safe to use? This is a bit, you can test this without users necessarily, but are the answers meaningful consistently? The way you test that may be difficult to traditional technology because it's not deterministic anymore. You've got to run through multiple examples and do almost red teaming in some instances, as you see with the like of the big companies. When OpenAI was bringing out Sora 2, ton of red teaming for months. So that might be one thing that comes into that testing phase. But more specifically in working with users and stuff, not so much risk testing, but more, is this usable? Is it viable for you? The biggest change, I'd say, is more so on the delivery side, to where you're no longer, it's like, oh, this button doesn't lead to where I thought it would. It needs to be fixed. It's more, actually, this output isn't as meaningful to me. I need it to have better interpretation of legal. Okay, well, you can start the changes you would make from a technical perspective are very different to the changes you would have made in typical software engineering for traditional technology. So I say in the sort of testing and iteration cycle, it's usually more the delivery that has changed than the actual going out and testing. It's the exact same framework for iterating on top of an MVP that you would have for traditional technology.
Thanks, Christian. Melanie, you're solo today. Your partner Venus, who is chatting about designing for AI with you, is on holiday.
It says hi though.
Well, there we go. We appreciate it. So as we expected, your presentation sticks in my mind because of it's just a very visually appealing presentation. Lots of animations, which is an absolute shock when you've got two designers doing a presentation. So tell us a bit more about designing for AI, and especially of the reactive to proactive UI and that continuous iteration loop.
Yeah, so in the talk, we kind of touched on different things, starting with how we move from tools to partners. And as you said, like moving from reactive to proactive UI, where the the tool should kind of suggest things on the go without you having to do specific things. So we also talked about simplifying and reducing cognitive load, so kind of give some information to the user about what's happening in the background without making them too technical. I think one of the biggest takeaways, following the feedback that we've had, was on this trust and privacy responses getting reliable part of the talk, where people were really interested in how much you need to surface sources, how much you need to say where things come from, that they're not made up from nowhere, and kind of how much we need to define new models. So on the reactive to proactive AI, I kind of have a few different points. So the first one is building trust and showing transparency. So when you kind of design, you always need to give the user as much context as what's happening, really show where things come from, if they're actually, as you said, Christian, coming from things that you can trust, and make sure that the model are not using your information later, kind of really building this trust with the tool and make sure that things are not will not be shared outside of what you're doing. especially when it comes to working with really sensitive data. Another point is context sensitivity. So when proactive really needs to be based on context. So for example, in our case, it's writing bids. So you need to know what the company is, what the bid is about, what the size of the company is, kind of understanding all this so that the suggestions and the writing that will be generated will be as relevant as possible. This is something that we really need to work on, and it's kind of a very interesting field as well. If AI makes a wrong prediction, kind of just need to surface it. You don't need to, you need to handle it smoothly. You can need to say, okay, so maybe you can learn from this mistake in the background, and maybe the user is able to say, okay, that was not very relevant, that was not very helpful, and kind of, instead of annoying them, giving them the power to tell us that is not correct, and kind of make sure that you bring the user in the loop. So we say keep the human in the loop, kind of balancing automation and control, and making sure that you keep users active when showing them results, and kind of ask them for their input, or ask them to take choices, ask them to, I don't know, give enough information for us to be able to give something relevant to them. So for example, we're working on a review tool. So when you have writings, we want to make sure that we use context when we give suggestions, but we also want to proactively suggest things when they're right. So that, for example, I saw this week in Figma when I was typing, and I'm not a great copywriter, but when I was starting to type some text in Figma, it immediately suggested relevant context because it knew the context of what I was working on, and I was actually quite amazed. So it's kind of, really using the context that you're working with so that you can suggest relevant things for the user to be able to work on, basically.
Really cool. Nice. And then finally, Ollie, you were focusing on building AI products as a non-technical person. So first of all, is it possible?
So I think the first thing we have to do is slice up what AI products mean.
Yeah.
So just to be crystal clear, I don't think you can build an AI model as a non-technical person. I feel like that's currently out of reach. Direction of travel and the speed at which we're going in that direction, maybe someone will do a model as a service business at some point or something. But I think that's still very much out of reach. But if you then come down to building an AI natured business, or building a feature inside of your product which has AI at its heart, I think that is increasingly possible as a non-technical person. But that depends, obviously, if you're an existing business, it depends on the team that's around you and what their infrastructure and setup look like. But I think where it is most possible, which I think is really where it gets interesting, is with Greenfield. The startup scene that everyone and the media is so fond of chatting about is when you have a blank slate, what is possible as a solo builder. Answer really on the greenfield stuff, I'd say, is yes, but unlike a good prompt, you're not going to one-shot it. It'll definitely be you'll definitely need to take multiple runs. I think you can see the power very early these days of various AI using AI tooling to build a software product, but I definitely don't think it's something you can do overnight. I think I've gone through a whole bunch of sort of painful lessons trying to work out how to efficiently build a product, even viably build a product using AI tooling, which has been really interesting as we go.
So tell us about those lessons and the pain at which you can help other people to avoid in your kind of discovery.
Okay, well, there's an awful lot, and I definitely say my mileage may vary. And I definitely would also point out, I've hung around with software engineers for a decade or more, and so I'm not completely new to that, but yeah, I definitely don't have a computer science degree or anything like that. But a few of the things that I found sped me along. I learned them, and then once I sort of absorbed them into how I built, everything got a lot smoother. One of them was anything previously you would work in very lo-fi environments, you'd postpone a lot of strategic work, because such as design systems, component libraries, any sort of architecture preferences or that kind of thing, a long way down the road, because you didn't know if the thing you were building was valuable. The problem with AI is AI if you're building with an AI model as a sort of as a partner or as a CTO, it'll make a bunch of assumptions if you don't specify these things. So one of the things I found was really sped me along was providing guidance or getting the AI to help me build those guardrails early. So I'd use the AI to help me put together a plan, an implementation plan. I'd use the AI to help me put together a component library with branding, something I'm not going to revisit for possibly years, that we can get right now. And then the AI will not make an assumption on branding. It will just go to that document that we already crafted. And that kind of stuff means you're not unpicking later when you realize that something hasn't worked. You can just get that right fairly early on. So that was like a huge win once we started doing that as just a standard at the start of building any new product. That was massive. The other two, I mean, one of them is not really a new lesson, but more discovery with building things having gotten so sort of at least visually efficient. You type some words into a box and a website magically appears. I think this makes everyone get very excited about how quickly they can build. But we found that the discovery work, the sort of research step, is actually more valuable now because you can go off course so quickly. And there's still huge value in talking to some sort of proxy for your market. So talking to users or talking to a focus group or doing a survey, anything, because AI will speed you along. It'll also speed you along on the wrong path very quickly. And so this has been like super crucial. So yeah, that's two of the sort of more valuable ones. I think they've changed the way we, as product people, my background's as a product person, they've changed the way I build and how I would work with engineers and designers a lot now. So yeah, it's hopefully it's of some value to your audience, AD, but we will see.
Well, there's so much more to go through from all of your talks, which you've only really given like a snippet of today. But I think that Todd is obviously unable to join us, who kind of closed us off with, after an evening of 5 lightning 10-minute talks about this topic, like, how are we all feeling after that? And I think the common theme was like quite overwhelmed, but also excited, and just kind of how do we then take this into our next step. But I think the common theme with everyone I speak to, whether you look at Todd, who's incredibly experienced with AI in terms of even actually from like an education perspective, there is fear amongst everyone, and that kind of imposter syndrome. So I'd really just like to touch on his topic, and we will follow up with him separately so he can go into it a little bit more. But I think this is something which we all have something to say about. So his topic was building AI champions from Skeptics. So he shared some antidotes to fear. And I'd love to hear from each of you a piece of advice or an experience or a fear that you're all still battling with, that you have when it comes to working with AI for our audience. So who's going to be brave and go first?
I can jump in, seeing as my voice is the one everyone's currently most familiar with. The main fear I constantly bump into is with engineers, software engineers, who historically have been the people who have been first to latch onto any new technology. I found engineers, generally speaking, are very much across all of the critical new findings across building software products. But it's been really interesting to see this almost polar split when it comes to AI of their apprehension. It doesn't come across as apprehension, it comes across as defensiveness. But when you start to pick at even very, very, very clever people, and there was an excellent post on Hacker News about it, like someone wrote an awesome blog about it. Just loads of people are a lot smarter than me, but their logic just doesn't stand up. And it's a really frustrating thing, because you know that AI is, if you're AI forward, if you believe in it's going to be a positive force, then seeing that fear hold people back is really frustrating. The only thing that I've found has worked was sort of talking to people in terms of what's the lowest risk thing you could do when it came to AI, like playing with AI. And in general, the lowest risk thing, without a shadow of a doubt, is playing with it. It's extremely cheap to use compared to most software tools. It's extremely accessible. Even and engineers can access most things. It's not like it requires SQL. You can just talk to it in natural language. So that has the nice thing about talking to logical people, is if you can bring things down to logic, it sometimes helps get around. But even so, I think almost emphasizing that this is very much a fear and very much an emotion thing, that hasn't always worked for me. It's been a very shocking. It's been shocking how polar it is. There aren't very many middle people sort of between two stools. Everyone's kind of picked a side already. it's very interesting.
Really interesting, especially from like the engineering perspective as well. That I'm quite surprised by that. Is there any antidotes following on from Todd's talk that you found like that have been successful in terms of antidotes for fear, or any experiences where that you've been through that you felt that you've had fear from in terms of using AI, or anything you're still battling with that you just want to share with the audience?
I think something that's Todd mentioned that we've had a lot of experience with in our company is reiterating to people that AI is not here to replace you. It's here to help you. Sorry, Ollie, if you said this at the first half of your talk, I was out for that. I only had the second half. But yeah, that it's not here to replace you. It's not here to take your job. It's here to help you. Sean, our CEO, always says it's here to push you up, higher up the cognitive hierarchy. And I think that's a really good phrase, because I think it's very true. And I think especially with a lot of industries like bid writing and law, a lot of these old school traditional industries that have been pen and paper for many years, it's a big change, and it's quite scary to think, oh my God, wait, this thing just has a button that has something that took me like 3 hours. But actually, it won't be good unless a good bid writer and a good lawyer and a good whoever is using the tool is also good, because anybody can use AI in a really shitty way and get a pretty bad output. But if you're skilled and you have the skills, and you'll excel, and the AI will not steal your job.
Thanks, Theo. Melanie?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty big shift for designers at the moment. Like, one big fear for sure in artistic practice in general is how much it feels like we're being stolen our things. So I think now we need to do a big shift in kind of almost getting the power back in using our brains to, like you said, to like kind of best use it for quickening some tasks that we are doing at the moment that are not the most fascinating tasks, or helping us. I think sometimes it can be quite useful to get to a really quick draft pretty quickly, or ideate with them on, like, I don't know, giving us some ideas on how to best surface something, and it comes up with a very different solution to what we initially had in our brain. So I think it kind of back to what we said in the talk is really considering it as a partner and work with AI. For me, one of the biggest fears that I have at the moment is its impact on the environment. So I think this is a really big challenge for everyone to really make sure that we have this front of mind, and that we maybe optimize models, optimize things for them to not be as painful, maybe surface some of it to the user, that it's actually maybe make sure you have everything before you click the button so that you save like a generation, because I don't think everyone is very aware of it. And that is some like, it's kind of an obsession that I have in my brain at the moment, is how we can maybe have an impact on this and make sure that we are aware of this, but I don't have a solution for it just yet.
I love that. That's really cool. Finally, to close us off, we've got a question from the audience, and this one is a big one. So bear with me while I talk you through this. So the question from the audience is, I specialize in quantum technologies and I'm currently trying to help bring it into digital consulting. There's a lot of synergies between the social shift needed between AI and quantum and new tech in general, which is where this thought has come from. My general approach to introducing new tech into a conversation is around the outputs, what the tech can bring without focusing on the technical implementation. Where this gets difficult with quantum is that it's really seen as a sci-fi topic. I was wondering whether if any of the panelists agreed with this approach and what alternatives would be. So big question, very interesting question. Wasn't expecting this to come in. But that is why I love our meetups. Anyone have any feedback, any thoughts, any opinions on this?
Can I ask a clarifying question? So
You can try.
what does it mean? My clarifying question is, do they mean, is the thing that they're asking about the approach of speaking about the outputs rather than the tech itself? Is that what they're asking? Is that good or not?
I wondered, my understanding of it was sort of similar. It's like, think what they're asking is, how do I communicate the value of it? Because I'm currently trying outcomes, but it's seen as too sci-fi, and therefore, and presumably that's their negative. It's not landing. And so I guess they're asking us if, in our experience with pushing AI stuff, is whether we have any gleaming insights.
That's where I think the question is aimed as well, because the real kind of actual question within that context setting is so it's where this gets difficult with quantum is it's really seen as a sci-fi topic. And so that's the kind of real problem I can see from this question. So I would agree that's kind of how I've taken it as well.
Did that help to you? I think from my point of view, I can see the point that the question has, which is these are potentially society-changing technologies. They're also kind of black boxes, at least. We might understand quantum a bit, and we might understand AI a bit, but we still don't really understand what the transformation, the nature of the transformation itself that happens in that these technologies enable. But where I think there's a difference, and we might not be able to help, is I think thanks to science fiction, lots of people have a natural understanding of what AI looks like in the world today, because there's been a very obvious interface, which is normally a disembodied voice or a holographic face or a robot that interacts with you as a human does. And we sort of see them as basically artificial humans in a way, like artificial brains, because of popular science fiction. Whereas quantum, I think successful sci-fi has probably had the same problem. Like if you tried to write a novel that was about the development of quantum technology, I think you'd struggle to find a reader who could stick with it. My understanding of quantum is fairly limited to just it is a couple of orders of magnitude improvement in compute power. So things which are billions of variables can be computed within a reasonable time frame, which we could never hope to do with silicon. That's my understanding of it. I think if someone could communicate how that's going to make life better for people in ways they can relate to, then I think that surely would be helpful. But almost maybe bring it similar to the way AI is, like the way sci-fi has made AI so accessible. It's just turned it into a face and a voice. How does quantum become an interface? Or what does it mean for interfaces?
Really interesting, isn't it? Because I think it kind of goes back to the fear side of things, like heavily as well. With like you just said there, if you can put a object or a familiarity around something, it really helps you to identify with it. As someone who's completely non-technical, that completely makes sense to me. Teo or Melanie, have you got any views or any thoughts on this?
I think the only thing I would say is AI for me only started to make sense as soon as I started seeing examples, like when GPT arrived basically and really surprised us all, or at least not tech illiterate people. It was quite mind-blowing, but still when I was in front of this text chat box, I was like, I don't know what to put in there. I have no idea. And I think it's like you said, Ollie, like it's really bringing some actually relatable things from your everyday life to understand how that can help you, how that can impact your life, how that can be a tool for you, but without explaining it in technical ways, but really kind of showing examples, basically like relatable examples, I think is the best way to do it. But I don't know much about it. But I think, I would say relatable examples is definitely the best way to get people's interest and hopefully bits of understanding.
Absolutely. Teo, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think I'm not really in the business of explaining it that much to people, but from a lot of our sales and customer success people in our company, I've heard that some people really benefit from seeing the examples, and sometimes understanding the why and the how is a bit too overwhelming and it confuses them at that moment, and they just need to see that it works and that's it. But sometimes people tend to understand it better and find it less alien if they actually understand what's going on in the background, and it makes it easier for them to then use it correctly because they know what's happening, they know the process, so it makes it better. It's easier for them to understand, how can I prompt it better? What inputs would be better? How can I use this tool in a more effective way now that I know the structure behind it and the logic behind it? So I think people learn things differently. It's just understanding who you're talking to and being able to adapt depending on who you're talking to and seeing what works and what doesn't work for them.
Really cool. Well, thank you all for investing your time and energy into like the meetup and the podcast. It's it was such a great evening, and I'm really, really pleased that all the conversation that's come from it. So just to close us off, I would love to hear from each of you anything which you can give back to our listeners. And this doesn't necessarily have to be about the topics that you've been talking about today. Anything which people can follow, books to read, podcasts to listen to, pieces of advice that you'd like to share with the community. The whole purpose of this is to create connections between people and help like people to learn. So is there anything that you guys are doing in your day-to-day lives or work that you think would be beneficial to share with the people listening?
I've got a couple
go on.
podcasts that I enjoy that I can share.
Yeah.
That are relevant.
Yeah.
One I really like is Y Combinator, and the other one is called I think it's Lenny's podcast. That one's a bit more product oriented. He had a really good podcast talking about with OpenAI's CPO, and in that one he really spoke about like how managers and product managers will have different skills in a few years. And what we should all be able to know and do.
I think you might have just stolen Ollie's as well by the look of his thumbs up there.
Yeah, no, Lenny's is a fantastic product podcast for just in general for anyone who's wanting to learn about product. Y Combinator 2. The thing that's been interesting about Lenny is I think he initially did an AI bit. He did an AI phase, and then he tried to get back to sort of pure product. And then I think the market he just wasn't getting the readership that he gets with AI headlines and AI interviewers. And he's come full circle. He's back like, you know what? I'm just going to accept it and go with the market. So like I think I saw the same interview. It was like Mike Krieger, wasn't it? The Instagram founder. Like it's that's a fantastic podcast. That was going to be the one I would recommend if you just want to know about product in general. Then it's great interviews. That being said, you can easily just look through for people who are AI related. I think actually, now that I think about it, I can find a different one to Teo. Claire Vaux, who is the founder of Chat PRD, which is a product term. It's just a product requirements document. It's just basically the way you describe a product to people or computers. But she created something called Chat PRD, which is a chat GPT to create PRDs for people really quickly and easily. Classic sort of AI 1.0 product. And Lenny has set up an AI dedicated podcast with Claire. Claire is very much AI forwards, and she's really impressive. She's a CEO, awesome person to follow in general. So yes, that might be one for people to tap into if they really, really want to zero in on AI.
Not had that one recommended before as well, so that's really cool. Melanie?
Yeah, so I have one AI related suggestion, which is the Rundown AI newsletter, which comes every day. I think it kind of gives you a very good summary of what's happening in AI in general. And then I'm going to put my designer hat on and share a conference that I saw at the Config London, the Figma conference, the one that says the web hasn't happened yet, which is from two people from Stripe Press. And for me, it was the most refreshing reminder in the area that's happening to kind of go back to the drawing board and go crazy with design ideas, be creative, be inspired. And I think it's a really big transition for us to kind of try to start to learn to live with. And I think it's a great time for us to designers to be really creative and not forget that we also have brains and fingers to create cool things.
Really good. I'm glad you came at it from a design perspective. I was hoping for that. Well, I really appreciate it, you guys. And then thank you to all our attendees from the meetup, our listeners to the podcast. And hopefully this leaves you with some AI takeaways, whether it's thoughts, opinions, or things to go and try. So that's us done. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for
Thanks,
having us,
Aidan.
Annie.
Thank you.
So much for having us.
Love to see you guys.